Okay, normally there's like a lady that says we're recording, but
I see the little dot in the
on.
your
Yeah.
screen, so I think it's happening.
Okay, cool. Um, so awesome. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to Code Talk, the Ruby Dual Boot edition. This is my friend and Flatiron alumna, Kayla Reopelle. Um, did I say that wrong?
It's all
Okay.
good.
Sorry. She'll say it again the right way. Um, Kayla is originally from the West Coast, from where again? I forget.
Washington?
Washington, yeah. And came over to the East Coast, went to Ithaca, where she met her wonderful husband, and um, through some life changes and whatnot, I'm sure you all have similar stories, decided to go to Flatiron through the online program. And we so happen to live about 20 minutes apart from each other. And so we had been meeting up pretty frequently. And she was a big help for me. And I hope that I helped her in some way or another. I don't know. Maybe just to be able to listen when she's like, this is so hard. I don't know. And she actually, even before you were done, got this job at Planet Argon over in Portland, Oregon. And that's where she's working now. And she was asked by her company to do a presentation on dual booting. That's going to be next week. And so I said, well, do you want to do kind of a practice run on Code Talk? So she said, yeah, sure. And yeah, super awesome, cool chick, very smart, willing to help, gives great hugs. And I'm sure she'll have a lot of really cool, interesting info to share. She described a little bit of it to me when we last spoke, and I was blown away. I'm like, wow, this sounds really cool. So Kayla's going to go over what she has prepared for us, and I just ask that everybody holds their questions until she's finished with her presentation. Kayla, do you know around how long your presentation is?
I don't. Honestly, I haven't timed it out yet. I wrote a bunch of notes at lunchtime and, figured I'd kind of go through my spiel and then we can continue on at the end with questions. And if you have any questions during, if you want to type them into the chat, we'll just wait to answer them until the end. But I know, at least for me personally, I like to be like, oh no, what's my question now that it's a half an hour later or whatever.
Yeah. Did you want me to give you a signal at a certain time?
Sure. Yeah. If you just ping me after half an hour and then we'll see.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And thank you for the lovely intro. That is super.
Yes, everything I said is completely true. You're an awesome person. Great. It was honestly like being a total newbie going into Flatiron. It was so cool to meet someone who, like, in real life lives so close to me, and she was like a lot further in the curriculum than me, but like still, oh yeah, let's just get together. It'll be good. So yeah, very, very helpful. And I'm very thankful to have been able to meet you that at that point. And definitely miss you now that you're back over on the West Coast. But so let's let you take it away. I'm going to mute and just asking, it looks like everybody else is muted. And thank you for coming out, people.
Yeah. So, so like Mike said, I completed the Flatiron program actually, I received the confirmation that I passed my final project on Thanksgiving, and got the job offer from this company that I'm working for just like a day or two before. So I feel extremely grateful that it worked out that way. I know that that's not the norm, and yeah, and I feel super fortunate to be here right now. So I started my job on December 8th as a Ruby on Rails developer at Planet Argon, which is a company that focuses, it's like an agency style structure that focuses on taking existing web applications and maintaining them. So the idea is not to build new apps from scratch, though sometimes that will happen. The goal is to retain clients who have a proven business model and work with their apps to build new features, improve test coverage, and like the topic today, sometimes conduct upgrades. And I mean, the transition from Flatiron and learning to having this job was huge. I think that Flatiron has like really prepared me in the curriculum that they have for how to solve problems. I think the online program has especially helped with like independent work and research. But there's also a level of, you know, working in person with other people that can be kind of different to practice speaking about code. And that's where, you know, situations like Code Talk are extremely helpful, because then you get a chance to speak about your code with other people, even if you're not physically with them. So I highly recommend like going out, meeting people, talking to people, talking about your code as much as you can, because you'll be doing that very regularly, most likely at your job. So yeah, so I have like an outline that I had kind of posted on the explanation. We'll talk a little bit about, you know, upgrades, rewrites, technical debt, and then like what this whole dual boot project is, and then kind of wrap it up with a few lessons learned that I've had while I've been on the job. And then from there, I think we can just transition into the Q&A, and you guys are welcome to ask me anything about what I speak about today, or about, you know, transitioning from code school, getting a job, finding a job, et cetera, et cetera. So, so yeah, so I guess getting started, upgrades are kind of the inevitable part of technology. We're always improving, we're always making things terser, there's always new threats or new features that you need to work in and accommodate. And I think one of the things that and I'm not sure, because I saw that Flatiron recently upgraded, so I don't know if the students got to hear it all about this process, but you often have code that works and then code that changes ever so slightly. And rarely at a lot of jobs are you going to be building new applications right off the bat. So it's good to become familiar with like less beautiful code, less terse code. You know, I think a lot of jobs look like diving into an app that already exists and either fixing something that's broken or adding on something that's new to something that already exists. So, you know, very rarely will you be spinning up these applications. And as companies and their applications grow, it's easy to accumulate what's called as, turn off my Slack notifications. All right. It's easy to accumulate what's called technical debt, which is just, you know, it's like, if you think of a to-do list at home, like if you're, you know, this door has been squeaking for a really long time, but I'm just, you know, I get used to the squeak. And then one day, like maybe the door rusts off or something. Like that's a really dramatic example, but it's kind of like to picture the little things that you set aside in code. Sometimes you'll write comments to yourself of, oh, we need to go back and fix this later. But the fact is, like on the job, a lot of times you'll have other priorities that are more important, because you're generally working for companies that are looking for profit. And sometimes, you know, that level of maintenance isn't part of the bottom line. And so it gets stepped aside and stepped aside and stepped aside. The project that I've been working on here that kind of inspired me to give this talk is with an application that was built initially in 2008. So I think its first version was on was on Rails 1.2. And then about 10 years ago, they upgraded to Rails 2.1 and Ruby 1.8.7, and they have not upgraded since. So the majority of the code that I'm working with even though this company has continued to build new features in the application, these new features have also been written in Ruby 1.8.7 and Rails 2.1. And it's just kind of come to a point where this application is so large and it does so many things that, and they've waited so long because they didn't kind of want to set things aside to maintain what they already had, that now we're in this predicament of trying to take an application that has 50% test coverage, over 10,000 tests, and is 10 years old with its code. So the way that upgrades have normally gone in the past is that you'll make a feature branch. You'll take, your application, make its own branch off of it, and then copy, just like throw in the new version of Rails and see what happens to your test suite. Or maybe you'll follow an upgrade script. And when I say throw in the new version of Rails, what I'm talking about there is that, like, if you think about it, Rails is just a gem. That's how Rails works. It's the gem in a gem file. You place it in Bundler, and when you upgrade the version, you just upgrade it there. And that has a lot of other ramifications. But when you're thinking about creative solutions to these large problems, sometimes it's helpful to go back to the beginning of, why does this work? And that's a question that I found myself, that I've found asking myself many times throughout this process. And so let's see, so where were we? Upgrading dual boot. Oh, so then with this upgrade, there's this application and this company that is large, and they are still not willing to slow down and stop production. And the problem with that is that large upgrades take a long time. I've been working on this project right now for, I guess, since January. And we are still not done with the first iterative upgrade. We're working to take the application from Rails 2.1 to Rails 3.0, which is a larger jump than I think is normally recommended, because the ideal way to upgrade is to go step by step. You read your deprecation warnings, those really obnoxious comments that you see all the time when you run your specs or whatever, and fix them so that they go away. And then you upgrade to the next version. And then ideally in that situation, nothing will break. And there's a lot of, great tools out there, especially there's one called Transpec with RSpec, where you can upgrade your test suite. So that way, as you're going along, you can make sure that, all right, my new version of Rails isn't going to support this version of RSpec that's currently running on the application. Let me make sure my specs still work, because your specs are kind of like your touchstone and your guiding light. If you don't have them and you don't have good test coverage, then it's going to be a lot harder to tell what breaks when you upgrade. If you have great test coverage, then it's a lot easier, because you can just rely on those tests to see whether or not things are passing or failing or broken. Problem with this application being so old is that tools like that didn't work. So we found ourselves needing to figure out how to juggle allowing this company to still build new features and allow us to upgrade the project. And so the solution that we came up with was a dual boot. And it wasn't a solution that we invented. This is a solution that has been talked about in the Rails community a lot over the past couple of years, because it was the way that Github and Shopify both upgraded their applications and continue to upgrade their applications today. So the idea behind the dual boot, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I don't know if this will be useful or whatever. We'll find out. But can go away. So what was I going to say? Okay, so the solution was to dual boot. And the idea behind a dual boot is to allow two versions of Rails to run on one application at the same time. Now, how does that work? Because Rails is just a gem. You have, oops, what am I clicking on? I swore, after watching all those lectures in the program, that I was not going to be the person who, got confused on Zoom, but here I am. Oh, can I make this bigger? Yes, I can. Um, yeah, so because Rails is just a gem, we have one gem file that's like the normal everyday gem file that has our version of Rails set on it. And then over here, we make a gem file next that has the other version of Rails. Oh, now I remember what I was talking about with Github and Shopify. So they have kind of pioneered this and implemented it in different ways, where through using a script right here, which is in shell, which is something that I did not know how to read or write prior to working at Planet Argon, but has been extremely helpful. So if you have an opportunity to play around with scripts and shell and Linux and all of those things, I highly recommend it. But basically what this is doing is based on a command that we run, which in this case, because it's a script, if we write script/next, since that was how Rails used to run. Now you can just type in like Rails G migration, but before you had to call out a specific script. It wasn't aliased for Rails. So if we haven't prepended anything, then we're going to use this fancy new gem file. Otherwise, we're just going to use the old gem file. And that's all it is. It's just a series of conditionals that switch which code is being run. And these conditionals start with the gem file, and then they continue into your config. So you find yourself like in files like the boot file, where we've defined this environmental variable, which I think you guys have probably used, depending on where you're at in the curriculum, a lot of times for your API keys. But what's great about environmental variables is that they're like the safer kind of global variables. And I think it's why, how they're like, the rule of thumb is to never use a global variable. And the idea behind environmental variables being okay is that they truly are global and they truly are accessible, and then they're nested within this kind of like environment container. So it's like if you're going to use a global, play by the environment rules, the environmental variable rules. This is still something that I'm also grasping my head around, as is the majority of this. So if any of you guys think, or like, are like, I don't know if that's the right thing to say, please point me out and call me out, because I'm speaking from my perspective, and I am sure that there are gaps. So just putting that out there. But if you see here, this regular old conditional method that we define called next just looks for the environmental variable next to be present. And then if it is present, then we have this little message right here that lets us know, okay, you're booting in Rails 3. And then it calls up that gem file that we need. And in order to execute the code with those gems, we combine it with that script that I showed you before. And so in this example, we see next being defined up here. And then right here, we see the next method being invoked in a conditional, so that if next, so if the environmental variable next is present, we're going to run Rails 3 code. If it's not, then we're going to run Rails 2 code. And so what this basically allows is that a developer who's working on the application in its normal state, its current state, its state on production or on master, they're not going to have to change the behavior at all. This puts the onus on the people who are upgrading to make sure that their code that they're adjusting works with Rails 2 as well. And that comes into play with a CI. And I am going to stop sharing my screen for a moment so I can get to a CI to show you guys. And so a CI, CI stands for continuous integration. And that is just kind of a way of like running your specs off of your computer. There's a lot more that, there's a lot more to it, but the way that I tend to think about it is just like, where do I go to see if my code is running properly, especially when you have a ginormous test suite that may or may not be able to run on your machine, or is different. It's a big part of version control. Anyways, so I'm going to share my screen again very briefly. And so this, what I'm showing you right here, is an example of a CI run. And up here, we're running the specs for Ruby 1.8.7, so the old version of Ruby and Rails that is currently running on production for the application. And then down here, we have the specs for the upgraded version that are being run. This is not a great example because I still have more code to do because I have failures on both sides up here. But ideally, before anything gets merged in to master, you need to have the current build passing. And then, for our own purposes internally, we've decided to have the upgraded build just to make sure by looking at the log that you resolve the errors that you set out to. So that's that. And then, where am I at on my chat? So we talked about those things. And so I guess I'll just show you maybe one more thing on my screen. Also, if any of you guys use OMIZ shell or OMIZish for your terminals, the creator is my boss. He's the guy who owns this company, so that's kind of cool. Okay, so we'll share again. Can you guys see this okay?
Yep, looks good.
Yep.
All right. So if, for example, I want to run the test suite on Rails 3, I've created all these aliases, which you'll definitely want to do down the line. That's another huge advantage to playing around with shells and scripts, is that you'll find yourself typing in the same thing over and over and over again. And while it's not a huge inconvenience, it's kind of annoying. So to tell you what I was talking about, so I'll pass in this environmental variable of next is equal to true. And then we'll run /script next. And then, for example here, we'll just run rspec to see what's happening. And so you see right here, it's accessing that version of Ruby, which is set through RBENV, a great version manager for Ruby. And then here are all my deprecation warnings. But you see right here that it's boot RB for Rails 3. And that's the goal. So that weird piece of configuration code is actually changing something here, which we can see by comparison. I'm going to use another one of my scripts. This is OR, which stands for old Ruby. So instead of, what you can do with RBENV is create a file that's called .ruby version. And you can, I don't know why you would need to do this in a lot of cases, but you can put multiple Ruby versions in there, and whichever one is at the top is the one that will be activated. It can also be helpful if you just need to specify the Ruby version for your project. And if you're using RBENV as a version manager, then normally you just put one version of Ruby there to test it out. So then we're going to run bundle exec, and then the way you ran specs in Rails 2 was by using script/spec or spec, and then we'll pass in spec to run the whole file. And now we see right here that boot RB Rails 2 is in fact running, and we have different warnings. So yeah, so that's a bit of it in action. Let's see. So I guess kind of where I want to go with this now is some of the resources that I found that have been really helpful for upgrades that I'd recommend you guys look into if you just need to kind of wrap your head around different versions. Who knows, maybe you'll be working for an application that works on like Rails 3 or 4, and might not have all of the same tips and tricks that you've been used to as you've been building your projects. So then go back here. The first thing that I wanted to point out is that the Rails repository on GitHub is a huge help, because essentially, it's open source. You can see it all, and some of the most beneficial resources in here are the change logs, for me at least, because you can see line by line what has changed. There are a lot of other better ways that you can check. I think one of the curious challenges that I've been facing is that Rails changed the way that they document things between Rails 2.1 and Rails 2.3. So the Ruby on Rails guides didn't exist until Rails 2.3. So I can't reference those for the older version that I'm upgrading from. So that's where situations like this come in extra helpful, because you can see what changed. And another thing that's pretty cool is that you can see who changed it. So if you end up committing something to Rails that gets persisted or merged, then your name will be on there. So if you want to help make Rails happen, you can do that. So this was really helpful last week, because we were like, the way that associations happened changed between Rails 2 and Rails 3. And we were able to prove that that was kind of the issue by looking at this change log. I guess before I move on to the next thing, another thing that has been extremely helpful while working here, and especially on this project, is writing notes about what I have tried and what worked, and what I have tried and what didn't work. And keeping a clear log of, kind of if you think of trying to resolve like every spec failure or bug as an experiment, like how would you document this in a different kind of science, and how could you learn from it? We are working in like computer science, but I found that remaining skeptical and procedural has been extremely helpful to not, go down the so-called rabbit hole in trying to figure out what is actually wrong. You don't want to make the same mistake twice, and I think that that's something here that the senior developers have talked about, that they really appreciate in a junior developer that's always making new mistakes and asking different questions. They don't mind asking or answering questions. They just get a little frustrated if you're asking them the same question over and over again. So just as like a random rant. So then the other thing is the Rails guides have been super helpful. One thing you notice here is that this is version 3.0.6, and you can change right up here in the URL which version it is that you're working with. So that can be really helpful in upgrades if something is changing and you're not quite sure why, to have a side-by-side comparison of, okay, this is what they were trying, this is how they approached this, method at that point in time. This is how they're working with it now. And in addition, the Rails API has been extremely helpful because, you can see what the code is doing. You can see which methods are even available in different modules. It's helpful to become very familiar with how and why Rails works, kind of like I said earlier, because then you're going to start like debugging a lot faster and understanding erratic behavior in, I guess, like a new way. Because sometimes, you're not going to get a great stack trace and you're not going to know where exactly to start. But through more repetition with the code, you become more familiar with what kinds of error messages might be related to something else. API doc has been amazing for me. There's before validation, I think was what I was working with earlier today. This is one example. So this is something where, if you guys can see here, in Rails 3, this didn't exist at all. In Rails 2, it comes back in a way. But we're over here at Rails 2.1. So I need to figure out how to write some kind of code that will work for Rails as it existed here and as it existed here. And that's tricky at times, but having resources like this to compare it is very helpful, because actually how it works in Rails 3, oh, they didn't have it on here, is that it just uses the method validates presence and then like a colon and then true. It's just slightly different syntax for basically the same method. But I only learned that because I spent some time on here. If you're dealing with especially old code that's especially obnoxious, you can also just go to the Wayback Machine. This is a service of archive.org that saves snapshots of different websites at different points in time. It can be really fun to explore if you are an archival geek like I was in my previous non-coding life. But you can type in like rubyonrails.com. And now you can see snapshots all the way back from 2005 of what the site was like then. So kind of keeping in mind of what it was when it was that the code was being written, which has been also a very helpful tool. There's something called git blame, where you can see who wrote the code and what commit it came from, like a decade ago. So you can look and see and try to get a sense of why did someone write this code, which context can sometimes be extremely helpful, because then you're trying to put yourself into the shoes of what the developer was trying to do, instead of just judging them about saying like, well, that's not how it should be done, because that's not going to really help you get any further anyway.
Hey, Kayla,
So, yeah.
Can you browse this, or it's just a screenshot?
I think you can somewhat. It depends on how much, like here's DHH's vacation blog. It just depends on if their crawler had archived it at that time. Mm-hmm. So I have run into a couple situations where it's been very disappointing, where I'm like, this is the blog. Like they'll mention these blogs that explain how to help your upgrade process. And they won't exist anymore. And get close to the blog and the Wayback Machine. And then sometimes I won't get it. So it's not always, the only, it's not always a great resource, but when it works, it can be really great. So those are some of the resources that I use all the time, in addition to Stack Overflow, and paying attention to like what year it was that the answer was written. Has been helpful to figure out if it's a tool that I can actually have access to for this project. And I guess, in addition to that, like, just to kind of wrap up, like this is a huge project. This is a huge code base, and it's not, I don't know what every model, view, controller, route, whatever is. And the way that I can kind of approach it to understand it a little more is by using Rails conventions. And so building applications with Rails conventions make them more maintainable for like whoever might be working on your app in the future. And so just try to write code that's helping a developer who might be looking at this project 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, because hopefully your company will still be around. That's my crazy talk. And I would love to take any of your questions now. I see.
Awesome. So real quick, that was freaking awesome, Kayla. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Kayla did say in the beginning that she would answer questions on both Ruby dual boot and the Flatiron school process that she went through. So I propose that we take questions on the presentation, and at around 7:50, I'll pause and see if anybody has questions not related to the presentation. But I believe I did see Brad had typed the first question in the chat earlier.
Yeah. So I would love to hear your opinion from a professional standpoint. What drove the decision to land on Rails 3XX specifically from where they were? So, Brad, the way that the company that I work for kind of judges whether or not they're going to take on an upgrade project is by going through a code audit. And they'll compare, which, the changelog from the different versions of Rails, and why they decided to move from Rails 2.1 to Rails 2.3, was that there weren't a ton of breaking, or to Rails 3.0, is that there weren't a lot of breaking changes between 2.3 and 3.0. So the goal with a lot of upgrades is to be as incremental as possible, is kind of what I was saying before. Taking care of those deprecation warnings and knocking them out will make the process way smoother. But this application, that I'm working on, its goal is to upgrade all the way to 6, because it will probably be at that point when 6 comes out. But just since we're going at this incremental pace to try to upset the apple cart as little as possible, that's why we jumped to 3.0. There was, in the history of Rails, there was like a really big rift and transition that happened around this time. It's kind of interesting to read about, but there were other programming languages like MERB or frameworks, I think, that were using Ruby, and they all kind of came together and stopped fighting and decided to invest in Rails. And so that shook up the way that things worked in a lot of ways, but has remained relatively stable ever since. So I guess to answer your question in a more succinct way, Rails 3.0, 3.0.6, which is what we picked. Normally you would pick the last minor version before the next major version, which in this case would be 3.0.20. This just happened to have enough comparison with Rails 2.1 so that we wouldn't need to break too much at once.
Cool. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you very much. That makes more sense. So when you were originally talking about it, I thought you were just saying we just set on 3.06 and we'll stop there.
No.
It makes more sense if you're transitioning to 6. It's it's just a really arbitrary random version to update to from where they were. And it's kind of shocking how far back they actually are on that. But
right.
Would you say it's more kind of a feasibility stage, where can we logically make the easiest upgrade to without, or I guess with the least amount of disruption in a time where it's most cost effective, really?
Mm-hmm. And then ideally with the dual boot, the way it works is that once you have upgraded and you're making sure that your test suite works on both versions, you rip out the old code and then just switch all those conditionals so that you can start upgrading to the next version. You already have the infrastructure set up.
I think I missed it when you had the screen up. So were you running, it looks like you had different directories for each major version. Is that what you were doing? So I saw Rails 2 was your parent directory there.
So that was just my pseudo app that I was trying to make to protect the client, but I think the client's name got out there a couple times during this talk anyway. So the only things that are really different between Rails 2 and Rails 3 are that, or I guess the versions, the current version and the next version, are the gem files. We'll create separate gem files. And then sometimes the configuration files, application.rb in the config directory didn't exist before Rails 3. And so that's a new file. And then application controller was just called application in Rails 2. So that's a different file. But most of the time we'll just use the same files unless it's so cumbersome to try to read through the conditionals. There's a really great plugin and plugins were gems before gems got into fashion. But there's usually whenever a new version of Rails is released, there will be some kind of script or code that you can run that will just generate some of the new stuff for you. And so we just relied on that generator to create a lot of the new stuff. And if it was new but named the same thing as something that existed in the previous version of Rails, then we'll just append next onto the end of it so that way we can kind of tell what is working with what.
All right, so you were doing all those major version changes then just really out of the feature branches like you're saying versus kind of cloning a directory?
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and then I see Sim asked .env file. I think if you're talking about, I don't know, Sim, if you're still here to kind of clarify, but the env file, that's often where you'll store your API keys and such, because you'll add it to that git ignore file, so that way it doesn't get persisted and they're protected. And the variables that are defined in there are environmental variables, so they behave where you can call them out and access them all over the application. But then exactly what they point to, like in the case of API keys, is hidden because is hidden from the public because that file isn't persisted in your version control. Oh, and then I see now that Justin had answered it, so that's cool. And let's see. So what text editor do we use at Planet Argon? It's actually up to our developers. They can use whatever editor that they want. And that doesn't really cause too many problems. So yeah, I have been using Atom. People use Sublime, people use VS Code. I think someone was like toying around with RubyMine for a little bit, but the editor doesn't really seem to make much of a difference. I think a much bigger thing that we push for is to use some of the same like package managers like RBENV, because a lot of the projects that we're working on are using very different versions of Ruby, Rails, Gems, etc. So it's more important to kind of like contain those versions and be able to troubleshoot together in that way.
Well, that's cool. I didn't realize that. I guess I was under the assumption that the company would have everybody using the same text editor or something. I didn't realize you get to choose your own. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I think, I don't know what it is in a lot of companies, but I mean, they ask us to all use Oh My Z Shell because Robbie made it. And that also is super helpful then too, to get advice for the command line and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't think the code editor makes a huge difference. It's whatever you're comfortable with.
Makes sense. Oh, by the way, I'm across the river from you.
I saw that. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm all the way from the other side of the bridge.
Cool.
All right. Ms. Lean, I forget how to say your name, but I do remember you from being in some study groups with you. So how long does it typically take to upgrade a large code base? This is the million-dollar question. So the upgrades are tricky, and one of the things that we've recognized is that, once you get some spec file to pass, then that will often expose the next layer of errors. So it's almost like an onion of problems. Eventually the onion will be gone. But every layer is a different kind of, more specific type of error. So in this situation though, because it's like this client that we're working with is not on a retainer, we're trying to work with them on this specific project. The code review that was done that I mentioned a little earlier for this company before starting the upgrade is about what we have used as our guide. I haven't been part of a large code review yet, so I'm not sure how exactly it works, but I think it's kind of an evaluation of like, how long has it taken if we've done previous upgrades on projects like this, because they've done lots of upgrades. How many breaking changes does it seem like are occurring? And then also, sometimes the application is like really relying on a part of code that is going to be deprecated in the new version. Sometimes the application doesn't use it at all. And so kind of looking at those deprecations and seeing how deep they are into the business logic of the code will depend on it. But right now we are working, so we've been working 2 months on this upgrade. And our goal is to finish with 3 by the end of the month. And then we'll need to get to 3.2 by the end of May. And that is that's a very rigorous schedule because Rails 3.2 introduces the asset pipeline, which is, where you put all your images and JavaScripts and things like that. And so we'll have to migrate over like hundreds of themes that they've created for their custom clients into that framework. So we'll see how that goes. But I think that it sounds like with the dual boot, the rule of thumb, or kind of the trend now, is you should always be upgrading. You should figure out how to integrate some system like the dual boot where you can have, your new code, or as soon as you see a deprecation warning, you can write a conditional that'll take care of it so that when you actually upgrade, then that's far less work to do. Again, one other thing that I forgot about too when I was talking about it is that when you have the dual boot, then you can also roll out your upgrade to just a few servers at once. So if you're working on a large application and have like a ton of servers, maybe just at night for like a third of your servers, you're going to try out the new code. because there's a lot of bugs that tests and things just will not hit. And it takes a user actually clicking around and thinking like a user and not like a developer to find what is broken. Do I have to write tests myself? If so, what resources do they use to write tests, to learn how to write tests? So I do. Not so much in this project because we don't know the business logic of the application. We don't know like what things necessarily should be doing. We just use the 2 versions of Rails to see, okay, well, it used to return this kind of value. Why isn't it returning this value now? But for the other projects that I've worked on here, every time you push a new feature, if you like add an extension, you need to have a test that goes along with it. And that just comes to like making the code more and more maintainable. To be honest, the way that I have learned is, I can share this link afterwards. There is a tool called RuboCop that's like a style guide gem and linter. And they have a RSpec style guide as well. And so I will often go there. There's a few lectures during the course of the program where they talked about RSpec. I revisited those when I got there. And there's also a book called like Effective Testing with RSpec 3 or something like that. That's from the Pragmatic Bookshelf, and I've been going through that. But on the fly, sometimes when you're in a job, like the best way to figure it out is to find out where else is this being done. So if this is an application, let's say, I'm needing to add custom slugs to all of these posts in a blog. Then I'll see, okay, well, does this blog use custom slugs anywhere else? And then if they do, all right, how are they testing it there? And then copy those tests and kind of refactor them for the situation. And that has been, like, truthfully, one of the largest strategies that I've used is, where is this already being done? How can I copy it and make it fit for what I'm doing here? And then take notes on that so that next time I know where to find it or how it happened, why it works, et cetera, et cetera. If you have, I didn't feel like I was at a huge disadvantage having come in without knowing how to write tests, but it was definitely like a bigger hurdle for me. And so I think if it's not too much time, maybe starting your next project, try to follow like the behavior-driven development model where you write a test, it fails at first, and then you write the code that passes the test. I think that that's like a really useful exercise to think about building more maintainable code. Thank you. Yeah.
And it looks like Sim took us into
the next phase.
Presentation-related questions.
So what is my advice to help students succeed? So
that's pretty heavy.
Yeah, I know. So maybe I'll just, it's okay. Maybe I'll just switch it back to what I found that maybe helped make me successful or what I felt the most successful in doing. Taking things slow, definitely not, or I guess I should say, don't rush through something, a lab, a project, whatever, just to get it done. Understand why it works and take notes. Truthfully, I have 3 notebooks that I don't really reference now unless I'm doing some React, because I think that was the thing that I felt the least confident about leaving Flatiron at the end. But I don't reference them, but the process of writing out the code on a piece of paper was super helpful for me to remember the syntax and remember the little things that would break everything.
I remember those notebooks.
Yes.
Down this.
And so I think, and then when you get stuck on labs and stuff like that, or are just confused in general, like bring it to the study groups, bring it to Code Talk to the, I want to call them professors, but I'm forgetting what they're called right now. And ask them your questions. And I would say, like, following their walkthroughs. That was another tool that I used that was really helpful, is when someone is going to do a walkthrough of a build, or if you're going on to like Flatiron's video library resource and you find a walkthrough tutorial there, build the things side by side. Whenever I was super stuck on a project, I would go through and find those walkthroughs and practice them before I built my own thing. And that was often the gap between, I have no idea how to start with making a CLI application and then passing my assessment. Like that was a huge, huge thing. Another thing that I didn't really expect to be helpful, but has been really helpful, is the blog posts, believe it or not. They are very, like, at least in terms of how things work here, it's been helpful for me to understand new concepts. If I can articulate them in a way that someone else might be able to understand them, then I probably understand them myself. And it's often a helpful tool for companies to get themselves out there. So that might be like an added skill that you can provide. Something I found out is that like Thoughtbot, which it makes Factory Girl and like a ton of gems. That's the only one that I can think of off the top of my head right now. But they're an agency, so they're just like my company, but they're all over the internet with tutorials and walkthroughs and how to do things and best practices. And if you can offer something like that to a company or to yourself, like that can be really beneficial. Okay. Brad is saying, nice on the notebooks. Mine were really big. So you recently graduated and would love to hear about how I approach interview prep, especially around computer science topics. That seems to be your hang up right now, and spending lots of time going into that. So I feel, again, super fortunate that my interview was like, I prepared for it all wrong, because I was freaking out about algorithms and computer science concepts, and how was I going to convince them that I was this intelligent scientist that I'm not. And instead, we just walked through debugging a Rails application, because here it was like, your job here is going to be debugging Rails applications and building new features. So we're going to take you through a sample scenario, and you're going to pair with a senior developer who you'll be working with if you get this job. And we want to know how you would solve this problem. So that was something that I felt like very privileged about. I actually came into it confused, and I still remember that I forgot like the render method in a controller, and I was like, oh, I'm definitely not getting the job now. But that was like the only thing that I forgot, because I had spent so much time focusing on learning algorithms. Anyway, so for CS topics, I still want to understand them and learn them. And the way that I have been doing that right now is there's a great podcast called Base CS. I have been listening to that and trying to wrap my head around it. And there are a few really great meetups that are focused on learning computer science concepts. So if you can find a study group in your area, find maybe like a university that has a computer science department that hosts public events. And then also the other thing, and this is another link that I could share, is that there are a ton of great like online courses that you can take as well. I haven't taken them yet. Yes, thank you, Alwina. That is exactly what I was going to say. The CS50 on edX is huge. The thing that I learned the most about it was when I got thrown into a meetup that they were hosting here, and it was like about getting people hired, and they needed someone to help run the mock technical interviews, and I needed a crash course of how to handle them from the person who was running it, because like I didn't know the computer science stuff. And she said that the most important thing that she looks for is like, are you asking questions if you don't know something? Are you willing to adapt and let me know what you don't know? And if I put you in a situation that's weird, how are you going to handle it? Because I think a lot of times, I mean, it does depend on, the job that you're looking at, but you want to know if they want to work with you, if you handle pressure well, and what happens, what does it look like if you do get frustrated? So those are my 2 cents. But I think other people would probably be more knowledgeable about what to do there. Dallas, Fort Worth. I think one of our developers here is from Dallas. I will ask them and post in Code Talk if they know any resources.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, because I look at Meetup and it's like, I know there's like a Dallas Ruby enthusiast one, but they always have like 5 people going, which is surprising.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe just not, a lot of people don't sign up, but I'm in Fort Worth myself, so it'd be like a 40-minute track. But
Gotcha.
yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
CS too. Yeah, I would definitely say just like think bigger, because it doesn't have to be Ruby. It can be anything. And then the biggest thing with them is to be able to talk the concepts out loud. Like I was working with someone who was very Python centric. And so everything is just like a little different than Ruby. I mean, it's like how I imagine like Norwegians and Danes can kind of understand each other, but like don't know exactly what the other person is saying. And that was fine. And they can still look at it, because computer science is computer science. It has patterns that go throughout all the languages.
Yeah, and I've noticed that with Python, because a lot of that tends to get written in like Python or C++, because I've been trying to do it in JavaScript, keeping up with Ruby and Rails with like personal apps, but it's been interesting.
Good luck. Yeah, I'll talk to them and reach back out.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, guys?
Now you mention it, are there any specific meetups in the Portland, Vancouver area that you would recommend?
Yes, the one that I've been going to, well, actually, it's like an inclusive environment, but Women Who Code presents some really awesome study nights is what they call them. And that's where I've been going for my algorithm. And then there's also a place called Hack Reactor, where and Pascal, and both of those places focus on just basically like giving people free coding assistance and having like weird late night study groups and stuff like that.
So my friend Ryan, who, Steven, you were in Code Talk with him, and that one where we had the numbers problem that we had to solve.
Yeah, I remember.
Out there, he went to Hack Reactor because Hack Reactor's another boot camp that has multiple locations, and he went to the Michigan location and ended up working there. So he said it's like a really good program. So just want to throw that out there as a second go do it.
It's just that the commute is kind of crazy between here and Portland. I don't know where Hack Reactor is.
I think it's downtown.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with downtown Portland enough to navigate through easily, but I will definitely check it out. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, it is. I've taken an hour of your time. Is there anything else that you guys want to ask before I sign off?
Hi, Alwina here. Just one quick question. You mentioned earlier that you had finished a program and like a few days before gotten your job at Project Argon. I'm sorry, Project Argon, right? Okay. What was the push for you to go ahead and apply at, start applying to jobs before completing the program?
So I had been living with my wonderful and gracious in-laws for a year, but it was definitely time for my partner and I to move on. And so I think that I had believed naively that I could finish the program in like 6 months or 4 months or something. I had some crazy deadline at the very beginning while I was still holding a full-time job and yada, yada, yada. Like none of it made sense. But I still had been talking to people about, hey, I'm going to graduate from this program and find a job at this time. And as as spring turned into fall, I was kind of chomping at the bit for like, what is this opportunity going to be and what can I do? And I must admit that at first I was way too like focused on the job part of it. As soon as I got my career coach, like I was meeting with her and going through the process, but then kind of put the curriculum itself on hold. And I would not recommend that because it made it a lot more difficult to jump back in. So then once I kind of got more into this balanced state, I just started looking for us. It was like we had a bunch of cities that we wanted to move to. And so I was just looking for jobs in those areas and found some that I thought would be, even if they weren't even if they didn't pan out, it seemed like they would be good environments for me to practice. So I had, other jobs that I was interviewing for as well, that I kind of didn't take as seriously as this one. This was really like the description that I read and wanted to do, and took like those interviews with them. And, by marking myself as like ready to be hired on LinkedIn, like that provided a flood of recruiters who would just call, and I would spend time talking to them to kind of practice. But yeah, so I think I just got, like, I don't think that this is normal. I feel like I just got lucky in terms of timing, and also like the timing for this company as well. But that I would kind of, because I knew I wanted the job as soon as possible, and that was, something that I was focused on. I just tried to like satiate that part of me by working like 2 hours a day, not 2 hours a day, working like 3 hours a week on like job related stuff. And then I would set that aside and then spend the rest of my time as like Flatiron curriculum time. So yeah, I guess, yeah, that's kind of my reason. Did I answer your question? I feel like
no, that was awesome. And in fact, if we can just chat offline, whatever the best ways to contact you. I have one quick like LinkedIn question that you mentioned there, and I just want to piggyback off of that, but offline.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
I don't know, whatever the best ways. I don't know the best way to contact you.
Yeah, I'll just post it in our chat right now. I would say the best way to contact me is via email. You can just go ahead.
And I'll also add it into the notes I've been taking for throughout the whole thing. And I'll post that along with the video recording in her email with the little smiley face.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kayla, I don't know, do you have to run off, or are you?
No, right away? No, I think, let me look at my time for tonight. Oh yeah, so yeah, I've fulfilled my work hours for today. So I can stick around if anyone had some more questions or anything like that.
Yeah, because it looked like Brad put another question in, and like if other people have to get going, thank you so much for coming out. Like I've been looking forward to this code talk for like forever since we scheduled it. So I hope you guys got a lot out of it. But if you wanted to hang out for a little longer, maybe like another 10 minutes or so, if anybody had just a couple more questions. Looks like some are filtering in a little bit. So
yeah, for what Brad was saying, for this agency is going through a lot of changes right now. But one thing that they are like very reluctant to change is the work-life balance. I think that was something about the founder when he started it, was a huge part of like how he was trying to figure out how to make life work, was to maintain like a good work-life balance. And they really like will say like, no, like don't work at home at the end of the day. We don't want you to burn out, is kind of the mentality. Because development is a thing where you definitely need your wits about you to do well. And so it's like this agency has vacation and health insurance, and we have like culture club events that we do. Like last night, a group of people went to like a board game lounge, like on the company's dime. And so I think that like for me, the bigger challenge has been to make sure that I remind myself that that's the expectation, that I'm not working longer than I need to be, that I'm not coming in too early and staying too late, because it doesn't truly make a difference. But I also have to remind myself that even that's what I'm telling myself that I want to do, is like, no, you should get in early. No, you should do this. That is not what they're expecting of me. And that's not what they're encouraging me to do. So yeah, no, definitely. I think that it's been interesting to talk to some of the other developers and hear about their experiences with agencies. I think like one of the things that drew me to this company the most was that the way that they wrote their job description, it was like, you sound like you really care about your people, because you were like so casual about how you were writing about, you know, who you want to have on your team. And so I think that's another thing to try to like keep in mind when you're looking at jobs, is like, try not to get into a situation where you're going to hate your boss and you're going to hate your work. It's going to be hard enough to adjust to this new field. And try not to make it harder on yourself by taking like a really crappy, not wanting to be at the place that you're at. Anybody else? You're welcome, Paula and Brad and Justin and Mizurin.
Everybody.
Yeah. No, I'm really glad. This has been an awesome experience for me too. So as Meg mentioned at the top of the hour, I have there's like a tech or a Women Who Code like talk night that's happening at another company in our kind of like complex. And so they wanted a developer from each of the companies to try to talk. And so yeah, so it'll be a very different version. It's only an 8-minute talk, but it's been extremely helpful for me as well to kind of say some of these things out loud and stumble and figure out what I would want to say differently. So thank you all for coming and listening and asking me questions. I think you'll make my next Thursday night a lot easier.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's going to go really well. And Kayla, if you would please, sorry for the train in the background, if you would please come on, maybe, you said it's next Thursday that you're doing it, so maybe next Friday or the week after. I think you're in our Code Talk channel. Hold on. If you're not, I'm going to add you in. But if you could just give us an update and let us know how it went.
Yeah.
And even like just tell us what you thought of everybody there and all the other speakers. That would be really cool.
Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if this is true because my parents were drinking at the time, but they talked about going out to Portland sometime soon, relatively. And I'm like, so if we go there, I'm going to have to take a day to like go visit Kayla and go do techie things because there's like a lot of stuff out there. And they're like, okay, whatever.
Well, that would be great. Yeah. Love to have.
So cool.
Pardon the interruption. I hate to jump on the bandwagon here, but maybe could I possibly meet you guys as well since I'm in the area?
I don't know, I guess. I'll keep both of you informed if I so happen to visit the West Coast. Yes.
I'm fine either way. I was just putting it out there.
Oh, Stephen, hush. Of course I'd let you know.
Thanks.
But thanks again, Kayla, so much for coming. I know you're going to do great next week.
Thank you. And thanks everyone else. Yeah. Thanks for staying up and chatting with me. Have a good night.
All right. Bye.
Thank you, Kayla.
Thank you.
You're welcome.